Hi there, this is Matthew from Patchwerks, and today we're going to have a look at the Cre8audio West Pest, a collaboration with Pittsburgh Modular, a West Coast inspired semi-modular synthesizer, and a friendly pairing with the Space Echo RE2, which is a modern reimagining of the RE201 Space Echo from long ago. A beautiful, beautiful pedal. It has some great sounds, and I wanted something to pair with the West Pest. The West Pest doesn't have any effects, so I thought I'd bring along a nice delay and reverb. So let's talk about what these two devices are. The West Pest, being a West Coast inspired synthesizer, needs just a little bit of explaining so you can understand what that means. There is East Coast, there is West Coast. What are they? Why do I need to know what the differences are? Well, an East Coast synthesis, which happens to be one of the more popular flavors of synthesis and what you find in most of your synthesizers, takes a harmonically rich waveform and a filter and filters out content from that waveform, leaving you with sound that you've shaped, if that makes sense. I hope that you can picture that in your head. In West Coast synthesis, you have a very simple waveform, which is not harmonically rich. So you're doing different techniques to increase the complexity of the waveform, which will then generate more noise. So that's what this synthesizer does. It uses wavefolding to make the oscillator shape more jagged, basically, and that creates more harmonically rich tones. Let me give you a little demonstration of that so you can really understand what I'm talking about. Right now we're on its simplest shape. It looks like a sine wave by the symbol here, and I have the keyboard, and I'll just play a note, and it's playing it over and over again because we're in the sequencer mode. So let me get out of sequencer mode. So it sounds really simple. I do have the resonance on the contour. Let me turn that. Okay, so this is about as basic of a sound as you're going to get from the West Pest. And it doesn't sound like very much. Maybe kind of like a electric piano type sound, like in the very beginning of you crafting one. Now, when I start to bring in the wavefolder, it's going to make that waveform fold in on itself, and it's going to become a much more complex sounding waveform. And it kind of sounds like it's moving through a filter, but it's not. Though it is moving through a low pass gate. So that's the idea behind West Coast synthesis versus East Coast synthesis. Now there's some more stuff, some more subtle nuances that make West Coast and East Coast different from each other. And that's that there's a lot of randomization that gets used in West Coast synthesis. And some of the effects tend to be a little bit more simpler. So often like a spring reverb if you're talking like Buchla stuff, and a delay. Which is why I paired this reverb delay pedal right here. And this thing sounds extraordinary. So this is kind of like your budget version of you buying into the West Coast idea. So you can buy into the West Coast idea of synthesis here, and you'll have a much easier time getting into it, and it will be a lot softer on your wallet. I want to talk a little bit more about the West Pest while I'm actually generating a bit of a sequence. So I'm going to start using the sequencer, introducing wavefolding, and then we're going to run that into the RE2. And while I'm doing this, we'll talk a little bit about the controls, and hopefully you'll get an idea of how to use this thing and how to generate sounds like I'm about to show you. Let me tell you a little bit about controlling these parameters here. So you see that we have yellow and we have white lettering. So if you want to get into the parameter that's labeled in white, you're going to hold down this button and then hit a button. So this says white on it, that means it controls white. This says yellow on it, that means it controls yellow. So if I wanted to change the sequencer from a sequencer to an arpeggiator, I would hold this button and press here, and that's moving between the sequencer and the arpeggiator. You're not seeing any action on this 4-bit resolution display, and this is what it means by 4-bit in the manual, is that we have these 4 lights, and whether certain lights are turned on or turned off or blinking is indicating where you are in your menus. What we want to do is turn the sequencer on, and then we'll actually see. So I'm going to hold the yellow button and hit sequencer. You can see we're in sequencer because it's a solid yellow light. And there's one note playing repeatedly because we've only hit the one note. So if I add another note, now it's just going back and forth between those two. Now we have this cute little sequence, and we can start folding it. Or we could have a modulator adjust this fold for us. That's what this knob is for, fold mod. So it's connected to this LFO, which I have moving at audio rate. I could slow it down if I want and go into a different LFO range by holding yellow and hitting this button. And now the LFO moves really slow. I can bring that into my fold here. So now that LFO is adjusting the fold, and even went to silence for a second, because it brought that waveform down to a shape that was inaudible to us. So I'll give it a little bit more fold so that doesn't happen anymore. And now let's turn on the Space Echo RE2. And it sounds so good, doesn't it? So on the Space Echo RE2, we have our echo volume, which is the top little part of this knob. And we have our reverb, which I can turn down. Now it's just the echoes. There are 5 algorithms on the RE2 that have reverbs in them as well. And you can tell by this thicker line around this encoder here, this big fat encoder, the biggest one that doesn't have an extra knob on top of it. There is a thicker line there, and that's indicating which algorithms have it, but it's algorithms 5 through 11. They all have reverbs, which is why we're in algorithm 5 right now, I think. So I can bring that reverb back. It sounds nice. Now we have like our feedback intensity here at the top part, and the tone, which is going to be a high pass and low pass filter. To the left, low passing. To the right, a high pass, which is pretty obvious. Turn those down. Or obvious sounding is what I mean. Making no assumptions here. Now we also have our repeat time, which is the top little part, and then we have wow and flutter, which is like a subtle modulation to the echoes. Turn that wow and flutter. Oh, it already is turned up. That's probably why it sounds so good. So here's the rate. We can tap tempo if we want. Hold down. Turns green. Alright, now we've tap tempoed. Hold it down again, get out of tap tempo mode. Let's change our waveform. Now we're in a triangle wave. There are waveforms in here that are a few waveforms added together. Just hold this down and keep it in the waveform. Now we're in a sawtooth or a saw. Ramp wave. Now we're in a combination of a sine and a triangle. Now a sine with a saw. Triangle saw. All of them. Sounds good for making percussion. Now we have like these little tiny snares. Let's get out of there though. It's not very fun. So we have modulation all over the place, and of course it's a semi-modular synthesizer, so if we want, we can patch things around. So the West Pest also has glide on it. We could turn the glide up. Let me start that sequence up again. dial it into taste. We could use this resonance to change the shape of our low-pass gate. A little too much glide. Change the algorithm here. Transpose the sequence. Hold down the yellow, hit the transpose button. Now we're in transpose mode, which is why that's blinking. Transpose. Now we're in a new sequence. Something really fun to do with West Coast synthesizers, and honestly any synthesizer, is using audio rate modulation. Right now our LFO is moving really slow because I just wanted it to slowly modulate that fold so that we had a really nice sound. I'm going to turn this down here. Let's bring some audio rate. Let me turn this off. Okay, so to get into audio rate modulation, what we're going to want to do is make our LFO go a whole lot faster. So I'm going to hold down yellow, change the LFO range. You can hear it doing its stuff already with the fold mod. So here it is to the waveform. So this is going to the frequency of our oscillator, so it can change the pitch if you're not careful and sound whack. Sometimes that's really cool though. Also modulate the release, which doesn't do as much at audio rate as it does with like a slower free-flowing sequence. That sounds pretty cool right there. Very simple sequence, but still really interesting because of the waveforms. It's kind of like what you'll find in Buchla-inspired stuff. The sequencers are really simple, really short sequences, sometimes only 5-step sequencers, 6 steps, stuff like that. Even though this can go, much longer than that, you don't need that many notes in your sequence to have something sound cool and usable, especially if you're trying to make like some techno or something. This would be a great thing to sample into your samplers. There's also a really cool feature that I like on here, and if we hold yellow, or I'm sorry, if we hold the white button here and go random, it's going to give us a random waveform per note. So we're going to get 4 random waveforms because we have 4 notes in the sequence. Oh, turn that back on. Oops, I switched over to ARP. My bad. Here we go. So there's our random waveforms. Again, we're using audio rate modulation right now. So here's just the wave folding and the waveforms. playing with all the algorithms, seeing what I get. Spaceship territory. We can add notes to our sequence just by playing some notes. Let's get out of that transpose mode. You can also add rests. You can go rest, rest, octave. So combos like this, semi-modular synthesizer, additive synthesis especially, because of how you're just constantly fiddling with things, trying to enrich sounds rather than remove sounds from it, really rewards exploration. We can clear the sequence by holding the yellow button and hitting clear. Let's check out the arpeggiator real quick. Hold down the white button and select here. Now we're in ARP mode. And I could just make a chord. And then we can transpose that chord around if we want by going into transpose mode. The notes will get a lot longer that way. You can also generate random sequences, which is really cool and very West Coast of it to have that ability. So to generate random stuff, hold down the white button and hit generate. So now we have a random chord generated into the arpeggiator. That's really cool sounding. Actually made a better sequence than I did. There's different ways of generating random sequences. You can have it generate a sequence that also has rests built into the sequence. waveforms we've been generating. We're just like West Coast La La Land. Clear that out. Let's turn off that random wave generator. Something nice. So it kind of works like a filter does in a East Coast synthesis. I'm turning the wavefold down and we're getting to what feels like a filtered waveform. But it's just returning its shape back to its original form. Doesn't that sound good? Sounds really good. This release mod works really well with a slower LFO. Change that range. Now if I turn this up, we're gonna get some really like clicky, tiny envelopes, but then we'll also get some longer notes like that. So if you have this turned up, you know, about 12 o'clock, your fold mod turned up a little bit, and then just give it some fold, it's just gonna play for you, and it's gonna sound really nice. Wow and flutter is that modulation, so it kind of like changes the pitch of the delays a little bit. That sounds really nice. This is kind of like where you want to get to in, well, for me, I think. This is where I want to get to when I'm playing with a synthesizer, is finding this like groove where, man, if I only had a kick and a hat and a snare behind this, I could be having a really good time. But I mean, on its own, this is quite beautiful. And without the space echo, it still sounds really cool. Like, it's just a great sounding synthesizer, and it is quite budget friendly in terms of the price, especially considering how much it costs to buy a sequencer and an oscillator and all the modulation that comes in this for its price, and it could be a module in your synthesizer. Kind of unbeatable, if I'm being honest. I'm quite impressed. Great job. Great job, Cre8audio and Pittsburgh Modular. Definitely made something that sounded really good and is a lot of fun to play with. Now, there's some really cool stuff I didn't go over with the RE2, and we'll talk about this in its own video, but I just wanted to bring it up that there are some really cool features they added to this. There's a bunch of like secret modes in here you set it on certain dials and then hold down the pedal here and then plug it in at the same time, and you can change it to different modes. Like you can change it to, you can change the delay length from 1 second to 2 seconds. You can change it to this twist mode that's really cool. There's one mode where you can change it to a preamp simulation from the RE201. That's really cool, so you can actually really get back to as close as Boss could get to the Space Echo, which is great. And then they have a larger version, like I mentioned before, that has a lot more features. It's quite a bit bigger, and it has more stomps on it for you to activate different modes while you're playing guitar or whatever you're using with your foot. And yeah, it's a really cool one to take a look at, and I do plan on diving into that as soon as possible. But again, I'm just really impressed with what they managed to accomplish in the West Pest, because it sounds fantastic, and there's some stuff in here that you don't find in West Coast synthesis, namely the resonance for a low-pass gate. That's something a little unique to this device, and adding release to the dynamics controller for the low-pass gate as well. That's something, usually low-pass gates are kind of a fixed sound, and you get like these nice little plucks out of them, and they sound great. But the idea that we have this control over the release for those plucks is really cool and kind of opens it up. We can also change it to have the envelope retrigger or not retrigger so that we have legato and get more of a gated feel so you can create leads with it. You can use other clock sources with this module, and you have clock divisions that you can get into. So, you know, it pretty much will play well with any device you get it. It has MIDI in and out through 3.5 inch. And of course, there's all this cool modulation that you can do. Another cool thing to mention about the West Pest is that it can act as your MIDI to CV converter. So anything that can do that for you and save you from having to buy something that is a MIDI to CV converter by itself, you have one built into your modular or built into this little enclosure. So that's pretty rad. So one last thing I'm going to show off is just a little of the semi-modular side. I think I covered most of the territory on this and gave you my opinion on it, which is a very positive one, is just using a couple of these jacks, breaking the normal. So these ideas in here, these concepts, they're all wired underneath the hood for you, but you have these inputs and outputs. We have outputs on the white side, inputs on the yellow side, and you're able to use patch cables to break the normalization so you can create your own, you know, connections. And that's the idea behind semi-modular synthesizers. So right here I have the oscillator output, so audio rate, running into the fold mod. So this LFO goes up to audio rate, but it doesn't go as fast as this oscillator does. So we can get some more dynamic audio rate out of the oscillator output. So let's hear how that sounds. Let's change the waveform. Let's do the random waveform again. This will give us a bunch of random modulations. And we can slow the clock down. So it's just a little bit sharper with that audio rate modulation. So let's see how much softer it got when I unplugged it. If I put it in the dynamic gate, it just keeps that envelope open at audio rate. This sounds pretty crazy. Cool, well that's it from me. This is the West Pest by Cre8audio in collaboration with Pittsburgh Modular, and this is the Boss Space Echo RE2, and they are best friends, as you can tell, and they sound super swell together, and I hope that you enjoyed this demonstration and maybe it inspired you to look them up yourself. I'm Matthew from Patchwerks. I'll see you next time.